At 56, Phil Mickelson's two children just refused his caddy offers in a shocking rejection. This isn't a rumor from the gossip columns. It's a real moment that tells you everything about where one of golf's greatest legends stands in 2026. The five-time major champion reached out to his own flesh and blood, offered them a spot on his bag, and they said no. Two kids, turning down their father in the most public way possible. And honestly, the pure audacity of it makes you stop cold. Regular working people struggle just to afford a weekend round at their local muni, dreaming of a glimpse inside the ropes. Yet these two kids, raised in luxury, handed every opportunity life could offer, turned their backs on their own father, a man who has won nearly $100 million on the course, who has walked the fairways of Augusta and St. Andrews in front of millions. They said no to a front-row seat to golf history. It's the kind of rejection that makes you wonder what the hell is happening behind closed doors in the Mickelson household. But look past the surface shock. These two children aren't being ungrateful or rebellious. They are making calculated decisions about their own lives. They've watched their father's world implode over the last few years. They've seen the club bans, the allegations, the family health crisis that nearly broke them. And when Phil reached out his hand, they realized something that changed everything. Saying yes to his world meant saying no to their own. Let me show you what really happened inside that family, and why this rejection says more about Phil Mickelson than it does about his kids. Here's the truth about Phil Mickelson right now, and it's not what you think. Personally, I think those two kids just made the hardest call of their lives. Do you think they were right to say no, or should they have stood by their father? Drop it below. And if real stories about golf's biggest names are what you're here for, you're in the right place. Subscribe. To understand why this rejection matters, you first have to understand where Phil Mickelson is in 2026. And let me tell you, this is not the same Phil who won the PGA Championship at 50 years old. That Phil was the most popular player in golf, the family man with the big smile, the guy who took risks and made them work, the guy who had the entire golf world in his corner. That Phil is gone. In his place is a 56-year-old legend who has become one of the most polarizing figures the sport has ever seen. It all started with LIV, the $200 million offer, the biggest contract in golf history. And Phil said yes. But that yes came with a price that no amount of money could ever cover. The PGA Tour banned him. The fans turned against him. The media coverage shifted from beloved champion to greedy defector. And the money? It didn't fix anything. It just made the problems bigger, faster, more visible. Now look at 2026. The numbers tell a story that would have seemed impossible just 4 years ago. Phil has played exactly one tournament this year. One. That was the LIV golf event in South Africa back in March. He finished tied for 48th place. 48th. The guy who won a major at 50 years old can't even crack the top 40 in a field that's supposed to be weaker than the PGA Tour. Think about what that means. 48th place in a field of 54 players. More than half the field beat him. The man who once beat Tiger Woods in a playoff, who was the oldest major champion in history, finished behind players nobody has ever heard of. That's a statement. A man whose game has completely abandoned him. Since that tournament, he has withdrawn from every single major championship. The Masters? He pulled out. The PGA Championship? Out. The US Open? Out. The Open Championship? Out. For the first time in his entire career, Phil Mickelson has missed all 4 majors in a single season. 29 years on tour, and this is the first time he hasn't played a single major. When he pulled out of the LIV Golf UK event, they replaced him with Scott Vincent, a player most golf fans have never even heard of. He took Phil Mickelson's spot. 1 tournament, 4 majors missed. A substitute taking his place. That's not a career slowing down. That's a collapse. But here's what makes this collapse so complicated. The problems on the course are only half the story. The other half is happening off the course. And that's where everything starts to unravel. Phil has always been Phil. He took risks. He said what he thought. He didn't care what anyone else thought about him. And for a long time, that worked. It made him a fan favorite. It made him a legend. But that same attitude that made him great is now tearing everything apart. What happens when a man who built his entire identity on being fearless suddenly has nowhere left to turn? The club scandals started surfacing. His home course, the Farms Golf Club in San Diego. Phil was asked to leave. Actually, he was told to leave. The story is that a female employee accused him of inappropriate physical contact before a tournament round. The club officials walked onto the course mid-round and told him to pack up and not come back. He was kicked out of his own club. Imagine that for a second. You've been a member of a club for years. You've brought them prestige. You've brought them attention. And then one day, in the middle of a round, they tell you to leave. They don't wait until the round is over. They walk out onto the course and tell you to go. That's humiliation, the kind that doesn't go away. And it didn't stop there. There were reports that 2 other San Diego clubs had also banned him. Then there was the story about an incident in 2015 involving a fellow player's ex-wife. Inappropriate images, inappropriate advances. Phil's lawyers denied everything, said the allegations were false and misleading, but the damage was done. Once the stories hit the news, there was no going back. Then came the health crisis. In April of 2026, Phil announced he was withdrawing from the Masters. The official reason was family health issues. That's the polite way of saying that something is very wrong at home. The details are private. Phil and his wife Amy have kept them that way, and you have to respect that. But here's what we know. One of his children is seriously ill, and when your child is sick, nothing else matters. Not golf, not money, not the PGA Tour, not LIV, nothing. Phil Mickelson is a man who has lost almost everything he built. His career is on life support. His reputation is in ruins. His club has banned him. His child is sick. And the man who once smiled through every storm is now completely silent. His social media is dead. No interviews, no appearances, no Phil being Phil, just silence. Then, into this perfect storm of collapse, he made an offer. An offer that would have once been an honor. An offer that became something else entirely. He offered his children a spot on his bag, and they said no. Why would they do that? To understand that, you need to understand who these children actually are. Not the name tags, not the family photos, the real people behind the headlines. And that's where this story gets even more complicated. Let's start with the eldest, Amanda Bryn Mickelson, born in 1999. There's a little-known detail about her birth that tells you everything about growing up in the Mickelson house. She was born the day before her father finished second at the US Open. Her entire life has been lived in the shadow of golf, even when she never asked for it. Amanda went to Brown University, an Ivy League school, but she didn't study business or marketing or anything related to sports. She studied Egyptology, the history of ancient pyramids, hieroglyphics, mummies. It's about as far from a golf course as you can possibly get. She chose to study civilizations that have been dead for thousands of years instead of a sport that was her father's entire world, a deliberate choice to go in the opposite direction. She's kept a remarkably low profile over the years, almost completely out of the public eye. She doesn't give interviews about her father. She doesn't appear in his promotional content. She just lives her life, away from the cameras and the fairways. In July of 2026, something interesting happened. Amanda was photographed with her mother Amy for the first time in a long time, and that photo made headlines for a completely different reason. But more on that later. For now, understand this. Amanda built a life completely independent of her father's fame. She didn't ask to be Phil Mickelson's daughter. She just is. And she's made it clear she's not going to live in his shadow. So when Phil needed a caddy, do you think Amanda was going to drop her life to carry his bag? Think about it. She spent years studying ancient civilizations. She's not a golfer. She's not a caddy. She's an Egyptologist. Walking behind her father for 72 holes on some of the most famous courses in the world, that's not her life. That was never her life. Now let's talk about the second child, Sophia Isabel Mickelson, born in 2001. Like her older sister, Sophia went to an Ivy League school, Columbia University. But her path was different. She studied architecture, designing buildings, creating spaces, art and structure, a world of creativity and design. She chose to build things that would last for generations instead of chasing a ball around a field. A deliberate choice to be something other than Phil Mickelson's daughter. But that's not all. Sophia also has an acting background. In 2019, she appeared in a film called Ruta Madre. It wasn't a Hollywood blockbuster, but it was a real role, a real performance, something she chose for herself. She stepped into a completely different world, one where her father's name didn't matter. one where she had to earn her place on her own terms. Like Amanda, Sophia keeps a low profile. She doesn't chase attention. She doesn't use her father's name to get opportunities. She just lives her life, builds her career, stays out of the spotlight. Here's the thing about both daughters. They went to Ivy League schools. They built professional identities. They chose paths that had nothing to do with golf. And they did all of this while their father was becoming one of the most famous athletes in the world. That's not an accident. That's a statement. Then there's Evan, Samuel Evan Mickelson, born in 2003. And this one is different. This one hits differently. Evan's birth was traumatic. He stopped breathing for 7 minutes. His mother, Amy, suffered a 6-inch tear in a major artery. It was terrifying. It was the kind of moment that makes you realize how fragile everything is. And maybe that's why Evan has always been treated a little differently. Maybe that's why his story matters most. Evan actually plays golf. He's not a professional. He doesn't want to be a professional, but he plays. He's a casual golfer. He enjoys the game. And in 2016, at the Masters Par 3 contest, he caddied for his father. It was one of those heartwarming moments that made you forget golf was even a competition. It was just a father and his kids, sharing something special. But Evan has made it clear he does not want to pursue professional golf. He doesn't want to be the next Phil Mickelson. He doesn't want to be a caddy. He just wants to play for fun. Because when your father is one of the greatest players in history, saying, "I'll play for fun, but I won't do it professionally," is a statement, a boundary, a line in the sand. Evan knows what professional golf looks like. He's seen it up close. He's seen the pressure, the travel, the constant scrutiny, the complete lack of privacy. He saw all of that and said, "No thanks, not for me. I'll play on my own terms. I'll swing the club because I enjoy it, but I'm not going to make it my life." So when Phil needed someone on his bag, Evan was the logical choice. And he still said no. Think about what that means. Evan had already walked the fairways with his father at Augusta. He had already experienced what it felt like to be inside the ropes. And he decided it wasn't for him. Not as a player, not as a caddy, not as anything. Now let's get specific. Which two children actually refused? Phil's offer went to Amanda and Evan. Amanda was the one who had never shown any interest in golf. She had built a life in Egyptology, a world completely separate from fairways and birdies. When Phil asked, she didn't even hesitate. She said no, not because she doesn't love her father, but because she had already chosen a different path. Evan was the logical choice. He knew the game. He had caddied for Phil before. He could have said yes. But Evan had seen what professional golf does to people. He had watched his father transform from a beloved champion to a polarizing figure. He had watched the scandals unfold. He had watched his family fracture. And when Phil asked, Evan said no, not because he doesn't respect his father, but because he respects himself more. Sophia was never asked, or at least, she was never asked directly. Phil knew she was in architecture. He knew she had built a life in New York. He knew she had her own world. So he didn't ask. He didn't need to. The answer was already clear. Amanda and Evan. Those are the two. And here's why they said no. There are 4 reasons. Clear and direct. Reason 1. Their lives were already set. Amanda was deep into Egyptology. Evan had built a life outside professional golf. They had chosen their paths long before Phil needed a caddy. His offer came too late. By the time he asked, they had already said yes to something else. Something that didn't involve fairways and scorecards and the constant pressure of being Phil Mickelson's kid. Reason 2. The health crisis. One of their siblings was sick. That's what Phil withdrew from the Masters for. That's why he missed every major this year. In that context, caddying didn't matter. Nothing mattered except the family's health. Saying no was about survival, not rejection. When your brother or sister is fighting for their life, you don't drop everything to carry a golf bag. You stay home. You stay present. You stay with your family. Reason 3. Phil's reputation. The club bans, the allegations, the public silence. Amanda and Evan had seen it all. They had watched their father's reputation crumble in real time. They had read the headlines. They had seen their mother photographed without her wedding ring. They knew that walking beside Phil in public meant walking into a storm of cameras and questions and whispers. They chose peace instead. Reason 4. Caddying is work. It's not a vacation. It's not a fun day at the Masters Par 3. It's 72 holes of walking. It's managing a player's emotions. It's constant travel, constant pressure, constant scrutiny. Amanda and Evan looked at that life and said no. Not because they don't love their father, but because they don't want his job. This wasn't a job offer. This was a front row seat to a train wreck. That's why they said no. Amanda and Evan, 2 children, 2 different lives, 1 shared decision. They both chose themselves over their father's world. Now let's put all of this together. The timing, the sequence, how it actually happened. Step 1. Tim Mickelson retires in March 2024. Phil needs a new caddy. John Yarborough takes the job temporarily. Step 2. Phil looks at his children. Amanda is building her career in Egyptology. Evan is playing casual golf but avoiding the professional path. Sophia is in architecture. He knows none of them want it, but he asks anyway. Step 3. Amanda says no immediately. She doesn't even consider it. Her life is already set. Her answer is clear. Step 4. Evan hesitates. He thinks about it. He remembers the Masters Par 3 in 2016. He remembers how it felt to walk beside his father. He also remembers everything that's happened since then. The live decision, the club bans, the allegations, the health crisis, and he says no. Step 5. Phil doesn't ask Sophia. He already knows her answer. She's in New York. She's building a life. She's not coming back to carry his bag. That's how it happened. Not one dramatic moment, but a series of small moments that added up to the same thing. Now let's talk about what all of this means. Because this isn't just about Phil Mickelson. This is about something bigger. When 3 kids all make the same choice, it's not an accident. It's a pattern. Amanda, Sophia, and Evan all chose lives outside golf. They all chose independence. They all chose to be something other than Phil Mickelson's child. And that tells you something about what it's like to grow up in that house. It tells you something about the pressure, the expectations, the constant attention. It tells you why they said no. Think about what they've seen. They've watched their father go from beloved champion to polarizing figure. They've watched the club scandals unfold. They've watched their mother struggle. They've watched their family fracture. And through it all, they've made a choice. They will not be defined by their father's legacy. And that rejection tells you more about the state of professional golf than any tournament result ever could. Amanda chose Egyptology. Ancient history over modern sports. Pyramids over fairways. That's not a rejection of Phil. That's a rejection of everything Phil represents. The fame, the attention, the constant pressure. She said no to all of it. Sophia chose architecture and acting, design and creativity, art and expression. She didn't choose golf. She never chose golf. She chose something else entirely. Something that had nothing to do with her father's world. And Evan actually plays the game. He's the one who could have said yes. He's the one who knew what it felt like to walk beside his father at Augusta. And he still said no. He chose casual golf over professional golf. He chose his own pace, his own freedom, his own life. 3 children, 3 different lives, all saying the same thing. We choose ourselves. You have to wonder what they saw, what they heard, what they experienced behind closed doors. Because this doesn't happen in a vacuum. Children don't just refuse to be part of their father's world for no reason. There's always a reason. There's always a backstory. And maybe that backstory is the health crisis. Maybe one of those kids is fighting for their life, and caddying just doesn't matter anymore. Maybe the rejection wasn't about Phil at all. Maybe it was about survival. Or maybe it was about the scandals. Maybe the children have seen enough. Maybe they've read the headlines. Maybe they've seen their mother without her wedding ring. Maybe they've watched their father's reputation crumble and decided they can't be part of it anymore. Whatever the reason, the result is the same. Phil Mickelson reached out to his children, and they said no. They said no to the money. They said no to the fame. They said no to the history. They said no to their own father. And that rejection tells you more about Phil Mickelson in 2026 than any interview or press conference ever could. So where does this leave us? Amanda and Evan said no. Sophia was never asked. But those 2 no's represent something bigger. They represent the cost of a legendary career, the price of fame, the damage that happens when a man becomes bigger than the sport. Phil Mickelson built a legend on the course. 5 majors, countless victories, a career that will be remembered for generations. But off the course, He's discovering that the same talent, the same charisma, the same competitive fire that made him famous, none of it can fix what's broken at home. His children made their choice. They chose themselves. They chose their sanity. They chose a future that doesn't involve walking behind a man they used to worship. And you can call it rejection, you can call it betrayal, or you can call it the most honest decision any of them has ever made. What do you think? Were Amanda and Evan right to say no, or should they have stood by their father no matter what? Personally, I think they made the only choice they could. When everything around you is collapsing, sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. But that's just my take. I want to know where you stand. Drop your answer in the comments. And if stories that go beyond the scoreboard are what you're here for, if you want the real story behind golf's biggest names, not just the highlights, then you're in the right place. Subscribe and stick around. There's a lot more to this story, and it's not over yet. There's a lot more to this story, and it's not over yet.